My daughter's wedding cost me everything I had, $26,000, years of savings, and endless effort. I chose and paid for her dress, the venue, and the flowers. But when it was time to say thank you, Samantha took the microphone and said, "I want to thank my real mom." "Thank you for everything, Carol." I froze. No one was looking at me. In that moment, I understood there was no longer a place for me in this family. My name is Sally Matthews. I am 56 years old, and I am the bride's mother. For half an hour, I stood slightly apart from the crowd, a crystal champagne flute trembling in my hand. My only daughter, Samantha, was marrying Jeff, the son of a car dealership owner. She was radiant, a star in a Vera Wang dress that I had helped her pick out back in January. At the time, I felt like I was carrying her happiness on my shoulders. I had spent all my savings on this wedding, $26,000, saved over years of working overtime at the hospital, cutting back on travel and food, and not buying a single unnecessary gift for myself in 4 years. It was all for this evening, to ensure my Samantha was happy and didn't feel less than others. Dozens of guests were all around with loud laughter, clinking glasses, and camera flashes. My ex-husband, Paul, sat at one of the tables, elegant and self-assured, with his new wife, Carol. Carol was a polished blonde in an expensive pantsuit, and I knew Samantha now spent more time with her than with me. I caught myself thinking, no one is looking at me. I felt like an invisible woman who simply paid the bill. Even the waiters avoided me. Their attention was focused on the bride's real family. Just then, as if on cue, the host asked the guests to gather by the stage. Samantha, laughing, took the microphone. I saw her glance briefly in my direction, and my heart sank. The applause died down as Samantha finished her speech and rushed into Carol's arms. A line of guests formed to congratulate the bride's new mom. Some were crying, others were taking pictures for Instagram. A happy family, an ideal American fairy tale where the bride always has someone to lean on. Only this fairy tale, for some reason, had become someone else's. I mechanically walked toward the dessert table. Cupcakes with golden rims shimmered on a tray. I had paid for them myself and remembered choosing the flavor and frosting color. Carol loves vanilla with raspberry, Samantha had said with a smile during the tasting. I hadn't even noticed the pain then, but now I felt like an invited guest to my own nightmare. Suddenly, my ex-husband, Paul, approached the table. His tie perfectly matched Carol's dress. Everything was planned and in style. He gave me a brief look, a mix of gratitude and cool detachment. "Sally, thank you for arranging such a celebration for Samantha," he said, as if it were an afterthought, adjusting his watch. "It turned out very stylish. Samantha was happy." I nodded, unable to speak. Inside, I was boiling with a sense of injustice. I was the one who made every call, corresponded with florists, managed the budget spreadsheet, and stayed up late, reading catering reviews to make it the best day of her life for my daughter. Yet I felt erased from the picture. Not a single photo, not a single thank you. It was all for Carol. Almost unconsciously, I stepped out onto the veranda. Garlands lit up the lawn, and the guests' laughter filled the night. On the other side of the venue, I saw Samantha laughing as she posed for a family portrait. Paul, Carol, and Carol's children from her first marriage. The photographer directed them, "Closer, everyone. Smile." I was left out of the frame. My daughter was at the center of a different family. I was a shadow in the corner, a stranger at my own celebration. Only then did I allow myself to breathe deeply. The air was not sweet, but bitter. Thoughts raced through my mind. Why did I try so hard? For whom? For a daughter who doesn't even look in my direction? My phone vibrated with a message from a friend who couldn't attend. "Are you okay? How was Samantha's speech?" I didn't know what to say. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to go back inside the hall. Standing alone on the empty veranda amidst the voices of strangers, I suddenly remembered my first year in America. I was 22 then, having just graduated from medical college in Boston and moved to the West Coast for a future that seemed bright and simple. I dreamed of a close-knit family like those on greeting cards, Sunday brunches, family walks, trips to the park. Everything changed when Samantha turned 5. Her father left for a woman from his company, and I was left alone with a child and loans for our small house. The memories rushed back with renewed force. I saw myself, young and tired, with dark circles under my eyes. It would still be dark when I made coffee and breakfast. Samantha would fall asleep at the kitchen table, her backpack nearby. "Mom, are you going to work again?" she'd ask sleepily. "Yes, sweetie," I'd say, stroking her hair. "But I'll be back for dinner. I promise." Sometimes I would get home late at night and Samantha would already be asleep, her small hand clutching a stuffed bunny. I would sit on the edge of her bed, kiss her forehead, and whisper, "I'm sorry I'm not here more." Every Christmas, I would sew her outfits myself. She was always delighted, as if the dress came from Cinderella herself. I enrolled her in swimming, then robotics, then ballet. "Mom, all the other girls have a dad. Why don't I?" she asked. "Because you have me." I would smile, trying to keep my voice from trembling. In the summer, we went to the beach. I'd pack sandwiches and bring my old camera to capture every moment. "Look, Mom, I have a shell," Samantha would say proudly. "I'm calling her Sally, just like you." I thought all these moments would be remembered, becoming the foundation for a real adult friendship. I wanted to be more than a mom to my daughter. I wanted to be someone who would always understand, listen, and support her. But years went by. I worked 2 jobs, a nurse during the day, and at night I would work at a pharmacy or take shifts at a nursing home. Sometimes I felt more like a shadow than a mother. But when Samantha got a college scholarship, I cried tears of joy, certain it had all been worth it. I saw myself again at Samantha's graduation, surrounded by young people with glowing faces and marching bands playing. I stood with flowers, and Samantha hugged me tightly, like she did when she was a child. "Mom, thank you," she said then. "I couldn't have done it without you." The memory blinded me with its warmth. I believed then that I was the most important woman in the world to my daughter. And now, 20 years later, I stood alone on the veranda, and all that pain, exhaustion, and sacrifice dissolved into the noise of a stranger's celebration where my love, it seemed, went unnoticed. Memories, like heavy waves, crashed over me as I stood on the veranda of a stranger's wedding. I saw the years I had lived for Samantha, and now her adult life seemed to have no room for me. Everything changed when Samantha was 14. After the divorce, Paul appeared in our lives less and less. At first, he would call her in the evenings, take her on weekends, and bring her to baseball games. I saw that she missed her father and tried not to be jealous, because children need both parents. But one day, Samantha came home, dropped her backpack, and said without looking me in the eye, "Mom, Carol made such a great dinner. Her house always smells like cookies, but you're always working." I felt a strange pang of pain, but held back. "Carol is a good host," I said. "You know I'm trying for us." With each passing year, Carol grew closer to Samantha. She was different. Bright, confident, stylish, with amazing stories about her life before she married Paul. She worked as a real estate manager, loved ballroom dancing, and knew how to throw a party at the highest level. When Samantha turned 16, Carol gave her a brand new MacBook Air. I could only afford a drawing kit and a new jacket, but Samantha opened the box with the gadget as if it were a ticket to adulthood. They started going shopping, getting manicures, and taking cooking classes together. I often found myself getting angry at Carol, but I suppressed the feeling. You shouldn't be jealous. The important thing is that your daughter has more support. Over the years, the distance grew. Phone calls got shorter and her answers were colder. "Mom, I'm busy. I'm with Carol. We're making dinner, then we're going to an art exhibition." In college, Samantha wouldn't call for weeks. I would send packages with homemade cookies, just-in-case money, and write emails, but sometimes there was no reply at all. But her social media was full of pictures with Carol, canoeing trips, baking classes, trips to California's wine country. I would look at these photos, the other smiles, Samantha's new family. Carol had her own adult children from her first marriage, and they became my daughter's older brothers and sisters. I wasn't in any of the family photos. By the time Samantha graduated, I understood. She had learned to hide her true feelings, to hide her resentment and disappointment, and to shut me out with a mask of being busy. But I didn't give up. At first, I tried to organize dinners, invite the grandchildren over for the weekend, and give Samantha my car when she got her license. But more and more often I heard, "Mom, don't be offended, but I'm with Carol today." Or, "Mom, do you mind if I go to Dad's for Christmas? Carol worked so hard decorating the house." Gradually, I accepted the rules of the game. Greetings by phone, photos in messages, and meetings only on major holidays, and even then, I was a supporting character. Sometimes Samantha would only call for business. "Mom, can you help with the apartment deposit?" Or, "Mom, can you lend me a few hundred until payday?" I always helped, but my heart grew colder. The grandchildren called Carol Grammy. I was just Sally. Gifts from Carol were displayed prominently in the children's rooms. Mine were forgotten in a corner. I remember the day Samantha sent me an invitation to her birthday party. "Party at Carol's, we'd love to see you." I showed up, holding a bouquet and a box of homemade cupcakes. That evening, I realized I was a guest, not the host of my own child's life. Now, looking at Samantha laughing with her new family, I wondered, at what point did I become an outsider? The question burned inside me, more than any resentment. That night, after all the dancing, toasts, and long family photos, when the limousines with "just married" signs had taken the newlyweds away, and the noise of the guests had died down, I got home late, almost in the morning. It was a strange feeling, like I was 25 again, not 56. It felt like I had moved into a new, unfamiliar apartment where everything felt foreign, even the walls. In the hallway, I automatically took off my shoes and placed them by the door. The silence of the apartment was deafening. On the kitchen table were envelopes from contractors, credit card statements, receipts for the tent rental, florist orders, and a menu with "Approved by Samantha" written on it. Next to them were vases with wilting roses that I had cut from my garden yesterday, for decoration, as Samantha had instructed, to make everything truly homey. I slowly sat down at the table, replaying the events of the evening in my mind. I saw Samantha's face, illuminated by the spotlights, and heard her words. "Thank you, Carol, for being a real mom." I remembered holding back tears, smiling to hide the pain. Inside there was only a hum, emptiness, and unimaginable exhaustion. I tried to distract myself, tidying the dishes, unpacking the gift boxes, and counting the money left on my card. The balance was only a few $100s. "Well, I'll manage this time too," I thought, and then suddenly laughed out loud. The laugh was hollow, desperate, and filled with a bitter taste of loneliness. I opened the window. The courtyard was already getting light. A boy with a dog ran down the alley, and a neighbor was taking out the newspapers. In this simple life, free of celebrations and glamour, there was a sudden sense of incredible freedom. I went into the bedroom and took out an old box of family photos. Samantha in the first grade, Samantha in my arms after a school play, Samantha hugging me tightly by a lake. These were all pieces of a life I had built for her, not for myself. My mind was in a jumble. I remembered that as a child, when I felt bad, I would take out my diary and write everything down. Now I took a notepad and began to write. About my feelings, my hurt, my exhaustion. The words poured out as if a dam had broken. I am tired of being just a mom who pays and sacrifices. I want to be a woman who can live for herself. I want to be respected, not just Sally, who will pay for everything. I am not an outsider. This is my life. It hurts, but I choose myself. When I finished writing, it was already light outside. I felt an extraordinary sense of relief, almost joy, for the first time in many years. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with tired eyes, but not a broken one. A woman who, perhaps for the first time, decided to do something just for herself. That's when I made a decision. Tomorrow I would rewrite my will. I would stop being a wallet and a shoulder to cry on for other people's convenience. I would become the owner of my own life. In that dawn, I realized there would be no more pain or humiliation. Now, I would choose myself, and no matter what anyone said, there was no turning back. The next morning was unusually bright and fresh, as if even the sun had decided to support my inner transformation. I woke up without the usual guilt or fear of the day ahead. On the contrary, there was a strange lightness and even excitement. What if a new life is really beginning for me? I took a shower, made strong coffee, and added extra sugar, just like I did in my youth. The wedding papers were still on the kitchen table, but now I looked at them calmly, with a kind of detached interest. I put the kettle on the stove, thinking about how my mood had changed now that I finally gave myself the right to choose. I changed into my favorite pantsuit, the one I hadn't worn in a long time because I had nowhere to wear it. Today, it fit perfectly, strong and professional. On the table, I found a business card, Christine Green, Family Law, Estate Planning. I had put off this conversation for a long time, afraid of seeming cruel, selfish, or a bad mother. But now I knew it was time to take charge of my own destiny. When I walked into Christine's office, it smelled of coffee and lemon. There were thick files on the shelves, family photos, and diplomas. Christine was a confident woman in her 40s with a soft voice and attentive eyes, a look like the one I once had, the look of a mother who is always there. "How can I help you, Mrs. Matthews?" she asked as we sat down at the table. With trembling hands, I took out my old will and handed it to her. "I want to change everything," I said. "What exactly do you have in mind?" Christine looked at me with understanding, without a hint of judgment. "I want to leave all my property not to my family, but to—" I hesitated for a moment, then continued firmly. "A charitable fund that supports women who, like me, once found themselves without support, without a shoulder to lean on, with a child in their arms. My house will go to a shelter for single mothers. My stocks and savings will go to an educational grant for girls from poor neighborhoods." Christine nodded. "Did someone hurt you?" I smiled, a little sadly. Sometimes hurt is just the starting point from which we begin a new journey. We discussed everything in detail: what to do with the house, what documents were needed, and how to set up the bank account so that Samantha couldn't challenge the decision. For the first time, I felt like an adult and a free person. Everything I was doing was my choice, not a reaction to someone else's requests and expectations. Leaving the office, I paused at a florist's window. I bought myself a magnificent bouquet of peonies, for the first time just because, without a reason, and not for guests. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe and ordered a cappuccino with marshmallows. Two girls were sitting at the next table, laughing and making plans for the summer. I took in their joy, not with envy, but with a new, quiet happiness. I would also have a life where I could choose when to laugh and when to be silent. That evening, I opened my laptop and applied for the cooking classes I had dreamed of since I was young. I signed up to volunteer at a women's shelter. I opened my closet and looked through my clothes, throwing out everything that reminded me of being a victim and a modest mom. I allowed myself to get a new manicure, choose a bright lipstick, and experiment with a new hairstyle. That night, I reread my new will. I signed it calmly, not with a trembling hand, with the name Sally Matthews. That name was finally mine again. Before bed, I didn't cry or think about Samantha, Carol, or Paul. I thought about myself, and for the first time, it didn't feel shameful, but joyful. A week passed since the wedding. My days were completely different now. Coffee with marshmallows in the morning, then volunteering at the Women's Center where I felt needed for the first time in years. In the evenings, there were cooking classes, laughter with new friends, and the discovery of a life without the role of the mom who always has to. I wasn't waiting for a call from Samantha, but when it came, my heart still skipped a beat. "Mom? Hi? Do you have a minute?" Her voice sounded tired, like after a long day. "Of course, Samantha," I said, trying not to let my emotions show. "Can Jason and I come over? We just need to..." Came in button I shat when I immediately felt the tension between them. Samantha looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, and Jason was holding a package of papers and nodding silently. "Mom," Samantha began, "we have a small problem. We found a great house, but we don't have enough for the down payment. It's very urgent. We've almost finalized the deal with the agent. We just need to make the deposit. $20,000. Carol gave us a little, but it's not enough." I nodded, trying to remain composed. "Why didn't you go to the bank?" "Mom, it's not always easy for young couples to get a mortgage approved. And also, well, I thought you'd help. You always helped." Jason looked me in the eye for the first time. "Mrs. Matthews, this is important to us. We know you've done a lot for Samantha, for both of us. You're so kind and self-sacrificing. Family is always about support, isn't it?" I looked at them both as if from a different perspective. They weren't children anymore, but adults who had grown accustomed to relying on me as a last resort. I no longer felt the familiar guilt. I was calmer than I had ever been. "I understand," I said, "but I can't help you like I used to. I spent all my savings on the wedding. Now I also need to take care of myself." Samantha flared up. "Mom, how can you? Isn't it natural to support your daughter when she has such an opportunity? You always taught me to be generous and not to turn away family." I sighed. "Yes, I taught you to be kind, but I didn't teach you to allow yourself to be used." "Used?" Samantha threw up her hands. Mom, I'm your daughter. You always put me first. And now I'm putting myself first, I replied softly. I'm tired of just being a source of help, just a wallet. I love you, Samantha, but I need space for myself. The room fell silent. Jason shifted his weight from one foot to the other. We didn't know you were having problems, he mumbled. I smiled calmly. I don't have problems. I'm just living in a new way. Samantha turned away from the window, then sharply turned back. What if we can't pay the mortgage? Do you want your daughter to be homeless? For the first time, I didn't feel pain from her words, only fatigue. I want you to learn to solve your own problems. You're an adult, Samantha. I can no longer be your life raft. Jason lowered his head, and Samantha looked at me with a new, strange expression, a mix of confusion, hurt, and, for the first time it seemed, respect. I didn't expect this from you, Mom, she said quietly. But I guess you're right, I'm just scared. I was scared too when I started my adult life, I replied, but that's what makes us stronger. They left without a warm goodbye, as they had in the past. I watched them walk down the path to their car, and for the first time, I didn't feel emptiness, only a slight sadness mixed with relief. That night, I understood. Being a mom doesn't mean forgiving everything. Being a mom means learning to let go. In the following weeks, life seemed to shift into another reality. It was as if I had walked out of a cramped, dark, and stuffy room into a spacious, light-filled kitchen where the walls held only my photos and the window offered a view of a new dawn. I felt something unusual, fragile yet strong, blossoming inside me, the ability to choose. Each day began with small joys. I woke up not to a call from Samantha or a worrying message from work, but on my own biological clock. I could have a leisurely breakfast, rereading an old favorite book, The Grapes of Wrath, which I had once hidden from Samantha in a dresser so no one would ruin the pages. There was always a fresh bouquet of flowers in the kitchen now, sometimes sunflowers, sometimes irises. I no longer bought them for guests, but simply for myself. The house smelled of vanilla lotion and coffee, not other people's party food. At the Women's Center, I was greeted with smiles. I helped women who had been through divorce, infidelity, or lost their homes. Each of them was a little like my past self. I listened to their stories, shared my own experiences, and at some point, I noticed that their gratitude wasn't a demand, and their tears weren't a manipulation. After our sessions, we sometimes went to a nearby cafe together, where we discussed books, talked about our children, and dreamed of taking a little girls' trip to the desert for the weekend. One day on my way back from the center, I bought myself some strawberry ice cream in a waffle cone. On a park bench, I saw a woman I had met at a support group. Chris, a lawyer from a nearby neighborhood, who was cheerful and vibrant, but had her own unique story. We started talking. It turned out she had gotten divorced around the same time as me, but was now representing women fighting for equal rights in court. You know, Sally, I always thought strong women were obligated to save others, she said. But now I realize that sometimes the most important thing is to learn to save yourself. This was the truth. That evening, sitting on the bench with my ice cream, I suddenly laughed in a way I hadn't in 20 years, loudly, genuinely, without being afraid of seeming strange. There was now room in my life for simple pleasures. On Saturdays, I would go to the farmer's market, buy fresh greens and sweet peaches, chat with the vendors, and choose bread not because it was cheaper, but because it had a crispy crust like in my childhood. I updated my wardrobe, throwing out all the clothes I associated with being a tired mom, old sweaters with bleach stains, and those dark skirts I wore to work. In their place, I bought a bright yellow trench coat, scarlet ballet flats, and a sunny hat. Now, when I went outside, I didn't hide. I walked toward the world. At the cooking classes, I met Jane, a retired teacher who had started writing stories after her divorce. "You know, Sally," she told me once, "I thought my life was over when my husband left, but it turns out it was just beginning." We cooked Italian pasta together and sometimes held small girls' nights at my place. I learned to open wine without anyone's help, discuss movies, and listen to myself. During these months, I realized that no one would hold my hand if I didn't learn to hold it myself. I no longer lived with expectations. I wasn't waiting for Samantha's call, hoping for praise from my grandchildren, or wishing my ex-husband would one day say, "You did a good job." Sometimes Samantha would still text, but her messages were short and without requests. "Mom, how are you?" And, "Mom, is everything okay?" I would reply calmly, but I was no longer in a hurry to offer help, advice, or money. Sometimes she would call just to hear my voice. I would listen to her and be happy for her new victories, but I no longer became consumed by her life. A distance had grown between us, not a cold one, but a soft, respectful one. Every evening before bed, I would sit in my new, colorful armchair with a cup of tea. I watched my favorite movies, listened to jazz, and read the letters I had written to myself as a child. When I grow up, I will definitely be free. Now I knew I had kept that promise. Almost 6 months had passed since the wedding. Life had a new rhythm. I didn't think about Samantha every day or wait for her calls. There was so much to do. My new friend Chris had gotten me involved in a volunteer movement, and Jane had insisted I submit a short story to a local contest. I went on day trips to the mountains, and one time I even took a horseback riding lesson, allowing myself to be silly and happy for the first time in years. I had become a different person, free but not bitter. Still, my heart would clench every time I saw "Samantha is calling" on the screen. That evening, the call came late, almost at midnight. I wanted to ignore it, but my intuition told me this wasn't a whim or a "Mom, please send money" call. "Mom, are you awake?" Samantha's voice was strained, broken. "I was just about to go to bed, but I always have time for you," I said. "I was at the notary today. Jason and I were preparing a power of attorney for the house, and they told me your will had been changed. Everything was left to someone else. No family home, no insurance, not even your stocks. None of it is for me. Is that true?" The room went completely silent. I felt her words hanging in the air between us like a thundercloud that could either pour rain or dissipate. "Yes, it's true," I answered without trying to soften it. "I changed the will. Everything I have will now go to women who are in a similar situation to mine. I want my sacrifices to not have been in vain." There was a pause on the line. Then anger, hurt, almost a scream. "Are you punishing me? Mom, I don't understand. Why are strangers more important than your own daughter? You always taught me to support family. And now? You've just erased me." I took a deep breath. "Samantha, family isn't just a last name or an inheritance. Family is about respecting each other. It's about being able to say, 'I love you,' without expecting anything in return. And you—" I stumbled, but I continued. "For many years, you only loved the part of me that gave you resources, care, and an endless yes. That's not fair." Her voice trembled. "Yes, I made mistakes, but I didn't know you were in so much pain. Why didn't you say something sooner? Why did you choose Carol? Why were you always so convenient?" I felt that for perhaps the first time she wasn't pretending. Because I was afraid of losing you, I said. I was afraid that if I stopped being useful, I would become worthless. But now you're losing me anyway. Mom, are money and property all we have left? I looked at my hands. They were strong, but at that moment, they felt so lonely. We have our memories, I said. We have our love, if you want to hold on to it. I'm not taking anything from you. I'm just, finally, leaving something for myself and for those who will truly value it. A long silence followed. Then Samantha quietly asked, "Do you really think I used you?" "I think often, yes," I said, "but I allowed it myself because I didn't know how to love myself." She was crying. I listened to her tears and didn't feel anger, just weariness and, finally, relief. "Mom, I'm scared without you," she said. "I was always scared when I was alone, but I learned to cope. You will, too. I don't want to lose you. I don't know what to do if I can't lean on you." "Then try leaning on yourself, Samantha. There's nothing to be scared of. And if you need support, I'm here. But I no longer live for approval. I live for myself. You've changed, Mom. I've become the person I always dreamed of being." There was another pause. "I'll try to understand," she said. "Just don't push me away completely, okay?" I gripped the phone and, for the first time in years, smiled after a conversation with my daughter. "I'm not pushing you away. I'm just learning to be happy. If you want, I'll teach you too." We remained silent for a long time, each on our own side of the city, but now there was no wall between us, only a path. It was long and difficult, but finally honest. Time passed. After that frank conversation with Samantha, I didn't expect immediate changes. People don't change overnight, especially after years of being trapped in familiar roles. Me as the savior, and her as the child who can always count on Mom. But a rare feeling for me emerged in my soul. Peace. I no longer lived with expectations or woke up with anxiety, wondering, what will they want from me today? I was finally living for myself. My days were filled with simple but important events. In the mornings I exercised to an old Etta James CD, singing along with her, "At Last." I bought a new camera and started photographing sunrises, the first golden rays over quiet streets, pink clouds, and the reflection of pines in the pond. It was as if I was learning to see the beauty around and within myself from scratch. At the Women's Center, I was welcomed like family. I taught self-care classes, showing other women what I had learned myself. How to say no, not to be afraid of looking vulnerable, and not to justify their choices. For the first time, I felt that my experiences were not just wasted, but had become meaningful to others. The women would ask me, "Sally, how did you learn to be so strong?" I always answered honestly, "First I broke, and then I put myself back together, but this time on my own terms." Chris, my lawyer friend, invited me to join a volunteer project called Mother to Mother, where we helped young women in difficult situations. I felt needed again, not as a wallet or a backup mom, but as a person with something to say and share. In the evenings, I hosted dinners for my new friends. We laughed, reminisced about our youth, and talked about our future plans. Jane would read her stories aloud, and I, for the first time, decided to bake a cheesecake for everyone, not just for someone's birthday. The door to my house was open not out of fear of being lonely, but out of the joy of meeting people who were kindred spirits. Things with Samantha had calmed down. She called less often, but now she would ask, "Mom, how are you?" and "Can we meet for coffee?" instead of making requests. We talked differently, not about money or who owed what to whom, but just about life, movies, travel, and new books. One day, she sent me a photo with the caption, "Look, Mom, I bought flowers just because." It was a small step, but I knew something in her was starting to change too. One spring day, we went to the ocean together, just the two of us, without Carol, Jason, or planning a celebration. We sat on the cold sand for a long time, listening to the sound of the waves. "Mom," she said suddenly, "thank you for teaching me to be strong. I'm sorry I didn't see how hard it was for you." "I had to learn that myself for a long time," I replied. "Thank you for learning too." We laughed, cried, and argued, but for the first time in years, I felt I was with an adult woman, not a demanding child. Our relationship was no longer based on sacrifice, resentment, and a sense of duty. Now it was a mature partnership. Sometimes I still felt sad. I would reread old letters, look at Samantha's baby photos, and remember how I once dreamed that she would always need me. Now I knew that true love isn't based on need, but on honesty and acceptance. I often thought about the women who lose themselves, who disappear into their children, husbands, and jobs, forgetting their own desires and dreams. I saw them at the support center, in pharmacy lines, and on park benches. I wanted to shout to each of them, "Please, don't be afraid to choose yourself, even if it means going against the familiar world, even if your loved ones don't understand at first, even if they call you selfish. Self-respect is the only thing that truly makes a woman free." Now I had a life I hadn't even dreamed of, a life filled with joy, new friends, simple routines, and inner freedom. I wasn't looking for gratitude. I wasn't waiting for approval. I knew that everything, the pain, the fear, and the mistakes, had not been in vain. One evening, as I was photographing the sunset from my balcony, Samantha called just to talk. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she said. I smiled, looking at the horizon. "Thank you, my daughter," I said. "I'm proud of you too. And of myself."